For this video, my goal is to challenge and inform those who may be on the fence about trusting in God and/or strengthen the faith of those who've already decided to do so. This video will be in conjunction with another, and if you haven't already, I'd highly recommend checking out the other one for full context, which will be linked below. Thank you for listening. Now, for the unbeliever, acknowledging God as being the creator of all usually leads to questions like, well, if God created everything, who created God? And to be fair, on the surface this seems like a reasonable question, however, its implications are hypocritical, considering that the ones typically asking this question are willing to believe that an impersonal universe either always existed, which violates the second law of thermodynamics, or created itself and them apart from an intelligent creator. So, even though at first glance, who created God seems like a valid question, it's actually illogical once you begin to understand just a little of who God is. God is the being from which all things that exist originate from and are sustained by. 1 Corinthians 8:6 says, "Yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom are all things, and we exist for him, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we exist through him." The Apostle Paul also affirms the fact that God's attributes are indeed partially revealed through nature. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give him thanks, but they became futile in their thinking and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. And indeed, we see this divine nature revealed in our singular universe, which consists of a continuum of time, space, and matter. A continuum because you can't have one without the other two. Three distinct entities, but the three are one. A trinity. The current cosmological model agrees that the observable evidence indicates that the universe had a beginning. And if all of time, space, and matter had a beginning, then following that path of logic, it had a beginner, because something that doesn't exist cannot create itself, which means the being who brought them into existence also cannot be made of time, space, or matter. So, through natural revelation, we understand that God is timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. And if you are timeless, you have no beginning. Past, present, future are not concepts that apply to you, which is why when Moses asks, "If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" Then God replies, "I am that I am." And he said, "Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me to you." He just is. No beginning, no end. He's pure, absolute being who simply makes things be. It's beyond understanding. Moreover, once again, the Big Bang is evidence that the universe was in fact created from nothing. Edwin Hubble was the first to discover that the universe is indeed expanding due to the redshift of light coming from distant galaxies between 1925 and 1929. As the galaxy moves further away from us, the light it's emitting is stretched over a longer distance. In the visible portion of the electromagnetic spectrum, this apparent stretching can be seen as light becoming redder in appearance. Shorter wavelengths of light have more energy, and in the visible spectrum will appear more blue, with indigo colors being on the high end of the frequency chart. Opposite is redder colors, present on the low end with longer wavelengths due to lower energy. Every element on the periodic table absorbs and emits unique wavelengths or spectra of light, which is how scientists are able to deduce the elements contained within stars. The spectra of light coming from supernova and distant galaxies is shifted toward the red part of the spectrum in correspondence with their distance, which is how we know they are receding from us. The degree of redshift by light from galaxies at a further distance relative to closer ones is even more dramatic, meaning they are moving away from us faster than the closer ones. So not only is the universe expanding, but the expansion is accelerating. If you were somehow able to reverse the flow of time, you would observe all light-bearing objects in the universe reuniting, with the universe as a whole appearing to collapse back in on itself, back to nothingness. And contrary to what many think, scientists back then, and especially ones who believed in Darwinian evolution, did not like this idea of an expanding universe. At this point in the early 20th century, the mainstream scientific worldview was that the universe was static and homogeneous. Basically, most scientists believed that the universe itself was stationary and eternal, having always existed and continuing to exist, and looked more or less the same in any given direction, with our position in the universe not being special at all, an idea made popular by the Copernican principle. The model for the stationary universe was originally presented by Albert Einstein in 1917, who strongly disagreed with the idea of an expanding universe with a beginning. Even after mathematician and astronomer Willem de Sitter produced equations that could describe an expanding universe with the beginning, Einstein still refuted, stating in a letter to de Sitter, "This circumstance irritates me." In another letter, "To admit such possibilities seems senseless." See, most physicists understood the philosophical implications of a universe with a beginning, because if it began to exist, then it had to have had a beginner, confirming a creator, and that is no bueno for the popular theory of evolution. The stronghold that this static universe model had on the scientific community was quite jarring, as even temporarily setting aside the philosophical contradictions of the interpretation, the idea itself violates the second law of thermodynamics, which states that entropy of an isolated system, such as stars, solar systems, galaxies, and so on, always increases and things run down and degrade over time, tending toward chaos and disorder as time goes on. They don't just remain the same forever, or even worse, get better, which is the main premise behind macroevolution. Then of course, logically, an eternal universe just doesn't make sense. Eternity implies no beginning, no end. And if the timeline into the past was always endless, then there would always be an infinite number of days before today. But if there's an infinite number of days before today, then today would never have arrived or have meaning, nor would there be a tomorrow, because you can't add anything to an infinite nor take anything away. It's infinite. Yet tomorrow we're going to add another day. Therefore, the universe isn't eternal. And surely Einstein and others knew this, but chose to overlook the contradiction. It wasn't until Edwin Hubble's discovery of galaxies other than our own in 1924 and his subsequent observations that would lead to concrete evidence supporting the revelation of an expanding universe in 1929. And it wouldn't be until 1931 when Einstein would finally abandon his static universe idea, instead opting for a still eternal, expanding universe, which would again become the new broadly accepted cosmological model. However, the discovery of the cosmic microwave background radiation in 1965 was the final nail in the coffin. The cosmic microwave background radiation is the residual heat that uniformly permeates the observable universe, generated at the "let there be light" moment. Being the oldest light in the universe, the wavelengths of this relic radiation are stretched way past the visible spectrum and into the microwave region, hence the name. It's a cosmic screenshot of the earliest period in the universe and is argued to be the single most important discovery in the history of cosmology, providing concrete physical evidence that the universe had a beginning. Now, a very interesting fact I have to mention since we're on this topic is that long before any scientific endeavors would discover the universal expansion, in the oldest surviving manuscripts we have of the book of Isaiah, dated to be over 2100 years old, the prophet Isaiah actually mentions this stretching of the fabric of space in scripture. It reads, "He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in." And again in chapter 42, and again in chapter 44, 45, 48. As a matter of fact, this expanding of the heavens is mentioned many times throughout the Bible by several individuals, including God himself, when emphasizing his creative power. As a matter of fact, in the beginning of the Bible, Genesis 1, 6-8 says, "Then God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Thus God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. So the evening and the morning were the second day." The Hebrew word for firmament means to beat/spread thinly, and funnily enough, space-time itself appears to be flat. Now, briefly setting aside the observable evidence, since time is one-dimensional, meaning it only flows in one direction, that is, toward the future, we can deduced that the universe is based upon a system of contingencies. See, if I knock a glass of water on the floor and it shatters, that was contingent upon me bumping into it, which was contingent on me placing it on the table in the first place, which was contingent on me buying it, so on and so forth. Well, if we could rewind time and follow this system of contingencies back to the origins of the universe, you are left with two and only two options: an uncaused first cause that is outside of the system of contingencies, who would have got the ball rolling in the first place, or a system of infinite regressions, which is impossible and illogical, because once again, the timeline into the past can't be infinite. Atheists reject the former argument because its conclusion leads to God, and are ignorant of the latter, which is why all of the God not real arguments are always inconsistent. Concepts like instant special creation through the word of God is laughed at, but the same then turn around and still accept things like cosmic inflation, which suggests that in order for the universe to be so orderly and evenly distributed, and for gravity to not have immediately recollapsed it when it supposedly expanded into existence, it had to have expanded rapidly, reaching several light years in diameter in less than a microsecond. Sounds like instantaneous creation to me. And yet, there is no other theory apart from cosmic inflation that explains the C and BR's fluctuations and properties better. The book of Genesis shows us that the rules governing reality weren't all created at once. God formed them as he went, which best lines up with current assumptions in light of the fact that the cosmic expansion event would have violated all known laws and speed limits that exist today. Probably because, as recorded in Genesis, they weren't set in place yet. Which, speaking of laws originate from lawgivers, who are persons. The very concept of a rule wouldn't make any sense or hold any meaning apart from a mind. Do you believe an electron only carries negative charge, is only attracted to positive charges, and must repel other negative charges just because? No. The electron is obeying a set of specific laws set in place to establish order. And since electrons, gravity, and the other fundamental forces that be didn't exist at one point, as evidenced by the Big Bang and the cosmic microwave background radiation, as I've already stated in another sister video to this one, to go from no law to specific rules requires a choice to be made, a choice to form them, and decisions to establish how they should work. Choices are only made by persons. An impersonal, unintelligent universe could not by any process choose to produce these laws nor decide how they should function. Because behind all instances of order, there is an orderer. Allow me to elaborate. Nature has a natural tendency toward chaos, which we call entropy. And contrary to what too many persons believe, you don't get order from chaos. Chaos can't even exist or be defined apart from order. Chaos's prevalence is solely determined by the degree of disorder. Just like in the absence of light, there is darkness. In the absence of order, there's chaos. For example, you wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you already knew what a straight one was. There's only one version of a straight line, yet a virtually infinite number of possible deviations, all of which would be considered crooked, because the meaning and extent of crookedness is determined by the standard of straight, and the extent of chaos is directly correlated to the lack of order. Order can exist without chaos, is actually preferred. However, chaos cannot exist without order, and the presence of order signals that someone put it that way. The reason order indicates an orderer is because, and some aren't going to get this initially, the presence of order is unnatural. What do I mean by that? The second law of thermodynamics encompasses a fundamental universal quantity called entropy. Entropy, in plain terms, is simply a measure of disorder within a system or environment by examining the amount of usable energy that's converted into less usable energy, such as biowaste, thermal exhaust, etc. It plays an important role in how we determine the efficiency of a vehicle, for instance. A more specific interpretation of entropy would be energy's disposition toward apparent disorder by spreading itself evenly throughout a system or environment in which the movement of that energy is always from hot to cold. In short, entropy is why coffee cools and ice cream melts. And this entropy/degree of disorder always increases, it never decreases. which is why entropy is heavily linked to time. Just like time flows in one direction toward the future, entropy flows in one direction, toward disorder, from hot to cold, from high potential to low potential, because the end result is more stable. Now, for the sake of further establishing that the universe comes from God and necessitates its intervention on the basis that order is unnatural and apparent chaos is natural, let's perform a minor experiment. Say you had a box filled with a gas in which the total energy, which we call heat, remains the same, meaning energy can't flow in or out through the barrier of the box. This would represent a closed system, which is what the entire universe is. Then imagine we suddenly expand the volume of the box without increasing the amount of gas. What happens? The gas expands. When a gas expands into a larger volume, entropy is increased. Why? Because the gas becomes more randomly distributed due to the increased volume offering more possible molecular arrangements, which when compared to the former arrangement and distribution of energy is more disorderly. Interestingly, this manifold of possible arrangements would also include a possibility where the gas only occupies half the container, which, when considering the increased volume, would be just like the first state, which is more orderly, therefore decreasing entropy, resulting in an apparent violation of the second law. Now, although this is a technical possibility, said arrangement is so improbable that it's considered statistically impossible. However, some of you are sitting in the presence of the miraculous. You're in an isolated environment, your bedroom, classroom, office, etc., where energy is flowing from cold to hot. Picture summertime in Arizona. It's 103 degrees out. You're sitting in your living room, yet the room is getting cooler, not warmer, and the ice cream you stored in that big metal rectangle doesn't melt. You can actually feel the heat that's flowing from the cold interior of the refrigerator to the hotter exterior, which means the direction of energy flow is ultimately from where it's already cold to where it's already hot. The apparent entropy in any given system always increases, yet here is an instance where the entropy of your living room is decreasing in the presence of an orderer. Now, on the grand scale, entropy is still conserved by increasing entropy elsewhere, such as through the heat dumped by the condenser behind the fridge or ventilated to the outside by the AC. Nevertheless, we're still witnessing and participating in what is a natural statistical impossibility, a possibility that under normal circumstances wouldn't occur given the temperature differences of the environments. We made energy flow from cold to hot through order, because no natural law could ever produce these cold to hot phenomenon alone. Why? Again, because nature has an apparent tendency toward chaos. These counterintuitive circumstances can be produced because the laws of nature exist by, are only understood by, and ultimately subdued by an unnatural, or rather supernatural law, order, which is produced by orderers. Orderers such as plants, insects, animals, and humans, creatures who themselves are biological marvels composed of inconceivable dimensions of order that can't be accomplished by any natural processes, because you don't get order from chaos. Again, chaos can't even exist apart from order, which is exemplified in the intrinsic fine-tuned structure within the laws of nature themselves, as the apparent manifestation of chaos and randomness itself can be expressed as a mathematical function, making it a fundamental consequence of order. Chaos, like lies, like darkness, is an illusion. It's just the appearance of order's absence, but order is always there because it has to be, or nothing would be, meaning nature was voluntarily brought forth and determined by the grand orderer himself, through whom we all live, move, and have our being, which is the most fundamental reality that contradicts any version of a naturalistic worldview and entirely dismisses the notion held by many that there is no evidence for God. To say that there is no God is a very grand claim in and of itself. implying tons of things that must be true about reality that would blatantly contradict it. To throw such a statement like that around so loosely is unbelievably ignorant and immature. You have no clue the gravity of what's being implied by that statement, which is why it is written, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. The Lord looks down from heaven on the children of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God." To believe everything came into existence through random natural means is an affront to the truth and far from reality, and only reveals a severe lack of understanding. Through inference and deductive reasoning, we attain even more evidence highlighting the creative intelligence of our Maker. Yet supposedly, according to mainstream scientists, we still have a majority of the scientific community pretending like they don't know where these underlying truths inevitably point to. For they deliberately overlook this fact, that the heavens existed long ago and the earth was formed out of water and through water by the word of God. It's become redundant to see some of these extremely intelligent scientists with popular platforms constantly ask the grandiose questions about the meaning of it all and our place and purpose in the universe, knowing full well in the back of their heads where and to whom those questions lead, and endlessly concoct all kinds of vain ideas and theories about how it all came to be apart from God. Theory after theory, concept after concept, discovery after discovery, ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of truth. Discussing the origins of anything apart from God will result in a conversation full of empty philosophies, ultimately going nowhere. Pride, which I myself consistently wrestle with, blinds you to an obvious truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attribute, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. God doesn't need us to prove his existence. Look up, look around. Have you not seen the clouds? Have you never been placed in awe of the blue expanse? It is written, the heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship. It's so obvious and in your face. You yourself are the work of his hands. His word is literally in your DNA. Creation is evidence of a creator. You would never look at a car or painting and go, I wonder how that got here. Perhaps somehow it began to rain paint for some time and somehow it covered the vehicle in all the right spots, and maybe if given a few million years, the spark plugs and ignition coils somehow developed on the ground and then surfaced and assembled, and perhaps by way of wind and erosion, the painting frame was put together and the ornate designs developed over time by weather. No. Even if that painting was hanging in the middle of a forest located in the middle of nowhere, you would immediately recognize that someone's been here. You wouldn't need his or her signature on it. They wouldn't have to come meet you face to face holding a certificate confirming it was indeed I, a human, that did it. You would intuitively know, and the same is true with God. Painting equals painter, creation equals creator. So to that Christian who's constantly trying to prove a point, you gotta humble yourself and understand that prayer is more effective and necessary. Because the reality is, people know God exists, but they suppress the truth in unrighteousness, just like you and I did, and in some ways maybe even still do. That's why Paul says, my speech and my preaching was not with enticing words of man's wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. So a lot of that debating and back and forth is futile. I'm not saying one should never use deductive reasoning and logic to defend the faith and or help bring somebody to Christ, but just don't cast your pearls amongst swine. All of that disputing and arguing is just divisive, and it'll only make you bitter. And I'm not just talking about in person, but I'm also talking about in your mind as well. We're supposed to love our enemies and pray for them. God bless.